Next, our focus report takes us to the West Bank, where hundreds of Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces and settlers since the start of the war in Gaza. Our team on the ground have been meeting residents of refugee camps who accuse Israel of terrorising the population. Well, in just a few minutes' time, we'll be speaking with our reporter Andrew Hilliar, who's here in studio with us. And just a warning that some of the images in his report contain some very distressing images.
Amid bursts of gunfire, a solemn procession of mourners. They're burying 2 Palestinian fighters in Tulkarem's refugee camp. Both were killed, along with a third fighter, in what the Israeli army called an anti-terror raid.
They surrounded the house in the evening. They were shooting at everyone who was there. My son's soul has gone to heaven as a martyr fighting for the dignity of the Palestinians.
Here, anyone killed by Israeli forces is considered a martyr. Several videos show the exchange of fire that took place on January 8th. A young man can be seen handing an assault rifle to another man. This bodycam footage of the firefight was published by Israeli border police on its Arabic language social media. They added subtitles to the video. On this CCTV footage that we've blurred and sped up, a vehicle can be seen driving over the inanimate body of at least one of the men and dragging it for several meters. Israeli border police didn't respond to our requests for a comment, but it told the Reuters news agency that it was conducting an investigation. Others who live in Tulkarem's refugee camp accuse Israeli forces of carrying out a policy of collective punishment. The owner of one shop says soldiers have damaged his storefront 8 times since October 7th. He wants to stay anonymous.
The main objective is to destroy, to put pressure on us. As you can see, by destroying shops and cars, arresting people for no reason. We've grown used to this barbaric kind of behavior, but we won't let it affect us.
The Israeli army insists it has to demolish these roads to dig up improvised explosive devices. Local residents say they spend days repairing what Israel destroys in the space of a few hours. But not everything can be rebuilt, like this building in Nur Shams.
They put snipers just there, in my son's house.
On January 8th, Israeli forces stormed the camp in an incursion that lasted 40 hours and destroyed this nursery.
They blew it up without warning us to leave.
This footage was filmed by the Israeli army. Its soldiers claim the daycare center was built by the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. They accuse Palestinian fighters of booby-trapping the building and stockpiling arms inside. We spoke to UNRWA, who told us it doesn't own a daycare center in Nur Shams. But it said it had employed laborers, gardeners or painters who may have worked on the building under the Cash for Work program, which was created 20 years ago. The camp's director also told us the plaque was at least 15 years old. He said since then, women from the camp had turned the building into a nursery. We head just over 40 kilometers east to Farah camp, where we meet the relatives of 2 men killed in an Israeli army raid on December 8th.
The army stormed the camp without any warning. There was nothing happening here. The men were just standing in front of their homes.
Rami's uncle Mansour accuses Israeli soldiers of unjustly killing his nephew. This is CCTV footage of the incident that we've sped up. An Israeli soldier shoots the 25-year-old. He falls to the ground and no longer seems to pose a threat. but the soldier sprays him with bullets, leaving Rami for dead.
This is where the bullets hit. You can see. If the occupiers had any legitimate reason to suspect him, they could have arrested Rami. He was injured and already on the ground.
The other victim, Taha Shaheen, can be seen on the second CCTV camera. He's hiding next to the white van. Moments later, the 37-year-old is shot and killed by an Israeli soldier at point-blank range.
His wife is pregnant and expecting a child in 2 months. The child will be born without a father.
The Israeli army told us it suspected its soldiers may have opened fire illegally and was investigating what happened. It added that local residents may have been armed with Molotov cocktails, but we haven't been able to confirm this. Rami's uncle Mansour looks to the past, quoting Israel's fourth Prime Minister, Golda Meir, to explain his outlook for the future.
Golda Meir once said that old men die and their children forget. Our job is to make sure that they don't forget.
For some, the seeds of hatred have already been sown. Across the West Bank, a new generation of Palestinians are growing up, vowing that they'll never forget and never forgive.
Well, for more, we're joined in studio now by our reporter, Andrew Hilliar. Andy, good to have you with us this morning. Since filming that report just a week and a half ago, Israel has been carrying out more raids across the West Bank. What's the latest? What's been happening since?
Yeah, well, in the last week alone, there has been a big upsurge in violence right across the occupied West Bank. At 1 a.m. earlier this morning, Israeli forces wrapped up an incursion that lasted 45 hours in Tulkaran's refugee camp. That's where a large segment of our report was filmed. We know that at least 8 Palestinians were killed in that raid. Funerals due to take place later today. There's been huge damage to infrastructure, to shops, homes. We know that also earlier this week on Wednesday, there was another Israeli raid on Balata refugee camp. That's one of the biggest refugee camps in the occupied West Bank, near the city of Nablus, where our team was based. Now, the Israeli military, when it conducts these raids, it says it's going after militants to flush them out of the camp. So that's how it justifies their military action. But there is always, of course, a significant collateral damage. You saw there in our reports the damage, the impact on businesses, on homes, and on people who live in the camps. People who live there told us that they say Israel is trying to put pressure on them, that they think Israel is trying to force them out of the camps. They say that Israel is subjecting them to a kind of a form of collective punishment. And the consequences of all that, as you saw again in that report, is that there is more anger, more resentment and hatred across the occupied West Bank directed at Israel.
And Andy, talk to us a little bit about the challenges that you face working as a journalist in the likes of the West Bank. How difficult is it to determine the facts of what's actually happening on the ground?
It is very difficult indeed. You often find yourself in a situation where it's one side's version of events against another side's version of events. That's why it can be very important, for example, to collaborate with our fact-checking team here at France 24, the Observers. I'll give you an example of one of the difficulties we encountered while filming and then editing this report. You saw in the report there the Israeli military claiming that a nursery in Nur Shams, they claimed it belonged to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. They said that it had been booby-trapped. You can see the pictures here. They said it had been booby-trapped by Palestinian militants, and they also claimed that those militants were using it to stockpile arms, so they blew up the nursery. Now, this is not the first time that the Israeli military has linked in some way UNRWA facilities, whether it's in the West Bank or in Gaza, to Palestinian militants or to groups like Hamas. We were on site in Nur Shams. We saw on that plaque the logo of UNRWA. We even saw the EU flag as well, which may indicate that it had been financed in part by EU funding. However, when we got in touch with UNRWA, they told us that the facility did not belong to them at all. And then when we kept digging, UNRWA told us that it may have employed construction workers, gardeners, painters under the Cash for Work program, which was set up 20 years ago, way back in 2004. So those workers may have participated in some way to the construction and maintenance of the nursery. But that's, of course, not the same as saying that the building actually belongs to UNRWA. So again, it's a case of really triple checking facts and claims from every side.
And Andy, then on a wider scale, how does international law apply to the operations of Israeli security forces in the West Bank?
I think it's a very important point to make. That's one that me and my colleague Melina Huet wanted to clarify. So we spoke to, once we got back here in Paris, we spoke to François Dubuisson, who is an expert in international rights law based in Brussels. And he told us there is a very important distinction to make between, in rights law, when you're in an active war zone like Gaza, for example, and when you're operating in an occupied territory like the West Bank. So in Gaza, where there are open hostilities, Israel can carry out preemptive strikes. In the case of an attack that might harm the civilian population, it's bound by the laws of war to give civilians advance warning so that they can evacuate. Now, in theory, those civilians who aren't evacuated must still be protected at all costs. They must not be targeted. Whereas in the occupied West Bank, it's international human rights law that prevails. What that means is that Israel, as the occupying power, it has legal duties towards the population. It must ensure humane treatment of the population, must ensure their basic needs are met. And with regards to law enforcement, which is particularly pertinent with regards to our report, Israeli security forces can only shoot to kill in cases of legitimate self-defense. So in a way, they're bound by the same legal obligations as French police, for example. So when Israeli forces kill Palestinian militants in the West Bank, under international human rights law, they need to prove that those men proved an immediate mortal threat to their soldiers.
Andy, thank you for that. That's our reporter Andrew Hilliar joining us after reporting from Israel, but also the West Bank.